reconvene our regular session. Mrs. Troublefield, will you call roll, please?
Mrs. Briggs?
Here.
Mr. Cathell? Mrs. Klein?
Here.
Mr. Neal? Mr. Peden?
Here.
Mrs. Pryor?
Here.
Mr. Steele? Mrs. Taylor?
Here.
Mrs. West Warner?
Here.
Mrs. Wright?
Here. We will call them back.
Mr. Cathell?
Here.
Mr. Neal?
Here.
Mr. Steele?
Here.
We do have a quorum at this time, and we can proceed. 3.02, I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda for tonight's meeting.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That is unanimous. And now if we would all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You may be seated. .04, student government.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Leila Hernandez, and I am representing the Student Council at Indian River. The first week of January flew by thanks to the unexpected snowstorm. However, we are back and ready to continue the school year. Clubs throughout the school have been very active with volunteer opportunities and events. Both the Student Council and Honor Society prepare for their annual event, Night to Shine. They work together to make this night very special. Enviroact met Friday to discuss registration for their club summit trip. The Leo Club continues to help out with basketball concession stands as well. Not only are our clubs succeeding, but our winter sports are as well. The Unified Basketball team is currently on a streak, winning 3 of their games this month. Swimming, basketball, and wrestling have all been working hard this season, each preparing for their last races or matches. With the season and marking period ending, students are busy preparing for finals. Finals began today and will continue into tomorrow, with new classes starting Wednesday. January is concluding, but sure enough, we will continue to see sports and clubs growing.
Thank you. 3.05, I would entertain a motion for the approval of the regular session minutes for December 16th, as well as 3.06, the approval of the executive session minutes for December the 16th.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That is unanimous. Now we move to recognitions.
Thank you, Mrs. Wright. 4.01, Lord Baltimore student Mackenzie Tweedy, first place Sussex County Fire Prevention poster. Typically, we recognize here in front of the board, but I don't know if Mackenzie was able to make it this evening. Mrs. Webb, no? Okay, well, we want to congratulate her nonetheless. Let's give Mackenzie a round of applause for that first place. .02, John M. Clayton, first place Sussex County Fire Prevention Safety poster. Is our student here from John M. Clayton, Mr. Murray? All right, welcome. Come forward, Mr. Murray. There she is.
Good evening. Tonight, JMC would like to recognize Annabelle Lehman for earning first place in the first grade division for the Sussex County Fire Prevention Contest and second place for the state's fire prevention contest in the same category. She has also been honored as the first place recipient in the 2024 Conservation Poster Contest in the K-1 category, and this is her second year in a row to receive that honor. Please join me in congratulating JMC's Annabelle Lehman. Okay, we also want to congratulate our John M. Clayton Elementary STEM teacher, as she has earned one of the 24-25 Project Lead the Way Outstanding Teacher Honors. She is one of only 103 Project Lead the Way teachers across the United States to earn this honor. These outstanding teachers across the U.S. inspire, engage, and empower their students by creating transformative learning experiences in their schools through the Project Lead the Way program. Please join me in congratulating JMC's Miss Jamie Swartz.
Okay, our next recognition this evening is Delaware Junior Honor Choir, Selbyville Middle School, Mr. McCready's.
Good evening. Selbyville Middle School is excited to have some of our students recognized this evening for their talents in the performing arts. Our students continue to impress. Joining me this evening on the stage is Selbyville Middle School Choir Director, Mr. Eric Savdar, who's going to share a little bit with us about these prestigious recognitions before calling our students up. Mr. Savdar, congratulations, students.
Good evening. I'm Eric Savdar from Selbyville Middle School. I teach choir. And first we're going to start with recognizing one of our students who successfully made it into the Delaware All-State Junior Choir. This was a very challenging endeavor. It required him to practice a lot of very difficult music and then ride all the way up to Smyrna and audition in front of judges who judged him against dozens, perhaps hundreds of other students from across the state. And well, he made it in, and we're very proud of him, and that goes to Mr. Simon Sandoval. Congratulations, Simon. A couple of months ago, we had a batch of students who made the Sussex County Junior Honors Choir. These students were selected by me as demonstrating musicianship above and beyond what we would normally experience in our choir. And these students participated in the festivities and had a guest conductor work with them, and did an outstanding job representing both our district and, of course, Selbyville Middle School. And we're so proud of them. And those students are, if you're here, please come on up when you hear your name, Reagan Carlson, Alyssa Claus, yep, Annabelle Galinskis, Angelina Yardova, Samantha Mason, Haley Owens, Aiden Parker, Madison Smith, yes. Yep. Here's Haley Owens, That's Aiden right there. Yep. Yep. Brooklyn Townsend, Emma Walker, and Carly Orton. Huh? Yeah. Yes. Yep.
All right, our final recognition this evening is the 2024 DIAA Unified Flag Football State Championship team from Indian River High School. Mr. Williams, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Owens. Mr. Steele, the former principal of Indian River, once told me, your school year is determined on how well your football team does, so we're going to have a great school year because we have 2 state championship teams and we're going to honor one tonight. In their inaugural season, the Indian River High School Unified Flag Football Team went 8-1, with the only loss coming in Week 1 to Cesar Rodney. Indian River would again play Cesar Rodney in the state championship game, defeating CR 45-32 after trailing at halftime 26-19. The comeback was led by seniors Donald Lingo and Elmer Hernandez. During the season, individual players put team first and continued to push and battle throughout the season to grow this talented team. This was truly a team and community accomplishment. At this time, I'd like to introduce the coaching staff, followed by the players. Head coach, Jamal Bivens. Assistant coaches, Glenn Tuckmantle, Lorianne Sentman, and Allison Wright. I know Ms. Wright does not like recognition, but we forced her to come up. And before I introduce the students, I can truly say if it wasn't for this group of 4 people, I can honestly say that Indian River would not have had a flag football team this year. Through their time, dedication, and desire, and commitment to students, they made this possible, and it was a tremendous year. So thank you, coaches. We will start with our seniors, starting with Donald Lingo. Elmer Hernandez Caballero. Chase Rowley. I don't think Chase is here. Evan Townsend. Hunter Bluto. Seth Byerly. And manager Anna Weiss. Our juniors were led by Braden Bennett, his brother Kyle Bennett, and Luke Williams. Sophomores, Kanaya Mitchell, Parker O'Shields, Caitlin Taylor. And Our freshmen, I think a few are not here. I will mention their names. Hazler Escalante, James Gentry, and Cole Lingo. These players were recently recognized for the Sussex County Council back in December, and they will also be recognized at Legislative Hall in March, and will be participating in a ring ceremony at Indian River High School this spring. Congratulations to all the student athletes, the families who have supported them through this year, and our community.
Congratulations.
Let's give that group one more round of applause. What an unbelievable season. Great championship game. Great job.
Now we will move forward with our public comment section. 5.01, public comments.
Thank you, Mrs. Wright. Looks like we have one signed up. Did you want to read our statement first?
The school board welcomes the opportunity to hear from the public during our public session, comment session at the beginning and end of each public session. Members of the public speaking as individuals or a member who represents an organization will be allotted up to 3 minutes. As per our board policy BDDH, in order to comply with the First Amendment, the board will not entertain protracted public comment within favor of or against a staff member. If a speaker makes defamatory statements or invades the privacy rights of a student or employee, the speaker is responsible for such statements and may be held liable. We thank you for adhering to this policy when you are sharing your public comments.
Thank you again. Lindsay Richard.
Good evening, members. My name is Lindsay Richard. I'm the Community Engagement Director at the Joshua M. Freeman Foundation. Many of you will know us for the Freeman Arts Pavilion, but during this time of year, we're busy in the schools providing high-quality arts education programming which aligns with Delaware state standards. I wanted to come here today to thank just a few of our incredible teachers and administrators who have been doing some very close partnerships with us in the last few months. In December, we brought the University of Delaware Easterly's Woodwind Quintet to Indian River High School. Thanks to Selbyville Middle School Band Director Clayton Reapin, nearly 300 middle and high school band students experienced this graduate level performance. The students were fully engaged, following along with their scores, which speaks to the high quality instruction that all of the middle and high school band students receive here. On January 8th, we plan to host New York City vocal group Backtrack Vocals right here at Indian River High School for middle and high school core students. While a snowstorm postponed the event, we're working to reschedule it, and this opportunity was made possible by the choral director, Laura Carey, who initiated the partnership, coordinated with other schools to ensure that all students could experience a high-quality performance. In March, we're excited to bring visual artist Saz Ross to Lord Baltimore Elementary. Thanks to art teacher Jackie Yerkes and Principal Pam Webb, students will create a school-wide mural focused on bravery. Last year, we ran a similar program at John M. Clayton Elementary with Principal Alyssa Booth and art teacher Marcy Ginsburg. In addition to these projects, we've brought other enriching programs, including several musical assembly performances, along with a high school program right here at Indian River in 2003 with support from art teacher Stephen O'Boyle, Principal Mike Williams, and assistant principals Matthew Keller and Robert Seifert. Since returning to in-school programming into 2022, we've reached every school in the district, some as much as 4 times, and impacting over 13,700 students. Finally, I'd like to thank Director of Secondary Education, Renee Jones, and Director of Elementary Education, Kelly Dorman. None of what we do in the district would be possible without their support and partnership, and we're immensely grateful. Beyond being a team member of the foundation, I'm also a PTO president and a mom to an elementary student in the district. I deeply appreciate the district's commitment to saying yes and providing arts experiences to all students. These programs spark creativity and innovation, and as a mom, I'm grateful for the enrichment that they provide to my children and countless others. Thank you for your continued support of the arts in our schools, and we look forward to future collaborations with your teachers and administrators. Thank you.
Thank you. New business, 6.01, school choice applications for 24-25 school year. Mr. Lewis?
Good evening, everyone. On your board docs this evening, you will find a total of 6 school choice applications. We're asking to accept all 6 of those applications.
Any questions, concerns, comments?
I make the motion, we accept them.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That is unanimous.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. 6.02, National School Counseling Week Resolution.
Yes, within board docs, we do have a resolution for National School Counseling Week, which is February 3rd through 7th. Mrs. Reed, are you with us this evening? I didn't see her. No. So I'd like to read the resolution that is in our board docs. Whereas school counselors are employed in public and private schools to help students each reach their full potential. And whereas school counselors are actively committed to helping students explore their abilities, strengths, interests, and talents as these traits relate to career awareness and development. And whereas school counselors help families focus on ways to further their academic, career, and social emotional development of their children. And whereas school counselors work with teachers and other educators to help students explore their potential and set realistic goals for themselves. And whereas school counselors seek to identify and utilize community resources that can enhance and complement comprehensive school counseling programs and help students become productive members of society. And whereas comprehensive developmental school counseling programs are considered an integral part of the educational process that enables all students to achieve success in school. Therefore, Indian River School District proclaims February 3rd through 7th, 2025 as National School Counseling Week, signed by myself and Board President Mrs. Wright. I would ask for action this evening on that proclamation.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That is unanimous. 6.03, Lord Baltimore Elementary Festival of Trees donation.
Yes, we did receive a donation from Festival of Trees. Mrs. Webb, any remarks on that this evening? I don't think they were able to join us, but I didn't know if you wanted to provide remarks.
Thank you.
We
Six-
we would ask for action on receiving of that donation from Millville Boardwalk.
A motion?
Second.
You have a motion?
So moved.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That is unanimous. 6.04, out-of-state school choice request.
Yes, we do receive out-of-state school choice from employees from time to time. We do have a fairly new policy on that where the board can consider those. In the past, the board has given those consideration with the understanding that there is capacity at the school in which the choice is requested. This particular employee is requesting choice to third grade at Southern Delaware School of the Arts. SDSA is a completely choice school, so we would ask that if the board approves consideration this evening for that out-of-state school choice employee student, that Dr. Evans would consider that student if capacity is available. And capacity would be, our priority would be given to our district students first, and only if there is availability would that student be considered. And again, we ask for a board consideration and potential action on that.
I would entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to accept. Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That is unanimous. 6.05, Howard T. Ennis change order.
Good evening.
Good evening.
On board docs, you will see the final closeout change order for the Howard T. Ennis Major Capital Improvements Project. This change order was presented before the Buildings and Grounds Committee. The final closeout change order is a typical administrative requirement on large construction projects. Its purpose is to reconcile the project dollars back to the original contract amount. The approval thresholds for the Ennis project are lower than those for the Sussex Central High School project, thus this change order requires board approval, even though it is for a decrease in the contract sum. Richard Y. Johnson Construction acted as the general contractor on this project. Mr. Brad Cowan is here to respond to any questions you might have. Absent of any questions, we are seeking board approval at this time.
Any questions on the Howard T. Ennis change order? To make it clear, this then closes out any activity we have at Howard T. Ennis, correct?
That is correct. It closes out.
I would entertain a motion to accept a change order.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That is unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sussex Central High School change order information. Notification.
Also on board docs, you will see 10 change orders this month for the Sussex Central High School Major Capital Improvements Project. All of these change orders have been presented before the Buildings and Grounds Committee, and all of these are being presented as board notifications as they are below the dollar amounts outlined under the board's procedures for change order approval thresholds. Mr. Brad Callen with Richard Y. Johnson Construction is here to respond to any questions you might have. Absent of any questions, we are seeking board approval at this time.
Any questions on the notice of change orders? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to accept.
So moved.
A second. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That is unanimous. 6.07, Sussex Central High School Academic Courtyard Surface.
Thank you. I'll tee this one up for us. There was considerable discussion at Buildings and Grounds. I'm sure Mr. Steele has this in his notes for later on in our board meeting. And you do have renderings within board docs that show the proposal for a change from a grass interior of the academic courtyard on the northern side of the new Sussex Central High School to an artificial grass. So the proposal came once we realized we did have additional funding that we could use towards this option. I believe it was part of the original projection that got pulled out when we needed to save. And so it was brought back as a possible consideration. As the team discussed, we felt that artificial grass within that area would allow the school to get much more use during the cafeteria time, for extracurricular activities, just utilized much more than if it's grass where there is concern, it could become muddy. Will the grass grow in that particular area? So that is the request this evening. There was also an additional discussion around Trex decking. That was very expensive considering what we can get that at Lowe's. I believe that was $47,000 based on the area that we were considering. After discussion during Buildings and Grounds and follow-up with the school, they do not recommend moving forward with that. If they wanted Trex decking, they believe they can put that down themselves with the students' support at some point, but they would like the board to consider the artificial grass for that interior. And Mr. Dooley, I'm not sure the exact cost of that because it is a change order to consider this evening.
That's correct. It's that, because of the amount of that, there is a change order in your board docs, so that would require board approval, and that's for $234,862 for the artificial turf and gravel border alone.
Mr. Steele, we did have considerable discussion. I don't know, did I miss anything there from Buildings and Grounds?
No. No, you've got it all covered.
Any
One
other
of the
board
things
members have
we-
questions?
I'm sorry. One of the things that was shared during Buildings and Grounds meeting was the fact that turf would be better utilized by students as opposed to grass in terms of, during inclement weather particularly, it's not going to be an attractive area if, students have to walk through mud and grass, wet grass and that kind of thing. Turf would be making it a more usable space for, longer periods of time throughout the school year. So.
Correct.
Lower maintenance.
Also, I think mowers limited access.
Any other questions, concerns, comments? If not, I'd entertain a motion to accept the proposal for the installation of the turf only.
So moved. Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Mrs. Stubblefield, will you poll the board, please?
Mrs. Briggs?
Yes.
Mr. Cathell?
Yes.
Mrs. Klein?
Yes.
Mr. Neal?
Yes.
Mr. Deaton?
Yes.
Mrs. Pryor?
No.
Mr. Steele?
Yes.
Mrs. Taylor?
Yes.
Mrs. West Warner?
No.
Mrs. Wright?
Yes.
She said. I said yes.
8 yes, 2 no, and 0 abstentions.
That motion passes by majority. Thank you.
Thank you.
6.08. Inclement weather days.
Thank you, Mrs. Wright. We have currently used 6 days. We've lost 6 days due to inclement weather this school year, instructional days. As you know, we have built in 5 days to our schedule to account for inclement weather, as we've done the last several years. Thus, the additional day and any subsequent days that we receive from this point forward would necessitate a consideration for modifying our current calendar. In the past, we've considered changing non-student days to in-person days or adding additional time onto our each school day to account for that lost time. Please keep in mind that any changes moving forward require board approval and 30 days notice. We did get some questions after we lost so many days for the inclement weather. Why aren't we considering our PD days that were really close after those snow days? And again, we've got to come to the board, and it takes 30 days. However, I would like to recommend to the board to consider changing our Wednesday, March 5th Professional Learning Day to an in-person traditional student day for students. This will recover one of those 6 days lost, and it would keep us on pace for our last student day to be June 13th and our last teacher day to be June 18th. ultimately, our goal is to bring students back in as much as we can after the loss of those days, so that would recover a day. The professional development scheduled for March 5th is for training for our staff on our new data management system. You've heard us use the term Infinite Campus, which is coming up. We would revert that back to the end of the school year. Our staff would still get that same training, but instead of the 5th, we'd move it to the end of the school year. And I just want to remind the board that any additional closures, hopefully we don't have any more, but any additional closures will result, again, in that extension of the school year into June to make up for those days. And there's no additional viable days on the calendar, no additional days that we could revert back based on our current school year. So I would ask the board to consider that option this evening. Happy to answer any questions.
No questions? Hearing none.
I actually
Oh, I'm
have
sorry.
one. Now that we have a new governor in place, are we thinking about retroactively going back to the new governor to see if they were willing to use any of those as emergency days, since the bulk of the estate was shut down during those days?
I have not heard anything from the current governor or the previous governor, any consideration for emergency days. And in fact, over the last couple of years, they've really not considered many of those days. We haven't had many large storms like that, but no indication of that to date.
Has the superintendent's group made a request to the governor?
They have not.
I would recommend they do.
Okay, I will follow up on that.
So moved.
We have a motion to move forward. Do I have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That is unanimous. 6.09, continuation of discussion and potential action with regard to the referendum.
Yes, thank you. During our off-board meeting, it wasn't a special board meeting, but not a regularly scheduled board meeting, last Thursday, the board took action to move forward with a referendum for March 20th. I have received some additional questions from the board, so we wanted to bring that back this evening. Mrs. Smith has generated some information she wants to share this evening with the board for continued consideration related to the referendum. Mrs. Smith.
Yes, the presentation is on Board Docs, so you can follow along. But based on the questions that we've received, I've consolidated them into a few slides. Slide 2 shows a breakdown of salary and OECs by year from fiscal year 17 through fiscal year 24, which is our last full fiscal year, with the percentage change over prior year. This is the same information from the presentation back in October. One of the questions that I received based on that data was that there was a large jump in fiscal year 2023, and that was attributable to several things. One, back then we talked about the 27th pay that affected contract payments, but there was also, based on the calendar and timing, 27 pay periods in fiscal year 23. That was also the year that we had EPR scale increases that hadn't been done for many years. We had, in the beginning of the fiscal year, a retroactive payment for fiscal year 2022 negotiations that hadn't been completed by the end of the fiscal year. Negotiated salary increases, increases in substitute costs, and we talked previously about divisors for units changing, and that was one of the years when our special education unit count divisors was changing, which results in increased units and increased staffing. Slide 3 is a breakdown of operating expenses by year. So this is our discretionary side, our local dollars, and the state dollars that we can use for our operations. Broken down by salaries, OECs, travel, contracted services is just when we're paying for a service rather than a good. Supplies and materials are those goods. Capital outlay are basically goods that are over a certain dollar threshold for most of that time period if it was a single purchase over $1,000. And then buildings are just things related to the buildings that meet certain criteria that we have to code that way. But that information shows you the totals and the percentage change over the prior year. Slide 4, I had a question on our recent salary negotiation and estimates for that. We have not completed all negotiations with all groups, However, that shows what the step increases cost, plus negotiated retroactive payments, step increases for next year, negotiated increases for that year as well, and then step increases and negotiated increases for FY '27. And please stop me if you have questions. Slide 5 shows our substitute costs by year. That was also in the October presentation. With the data I have available, I could only go back to July 1st of 2017, so that was fiscal year 2018, but that shows an increase over 2017 to 2024 of about $950,000 or 72%. A lot of that is attributable to paid parental leave, increases in personal days, increased costs for substitutes. As you know, we pay a premium to get substitutes in and get retired teachers in, and we're competing with all of the other districts. So between additional absences and increased pay, that has increased those expenses over that time period. Slide 6 shows a local salary analysis. So it's showing outside of regular pay, the regular salary payments that are made, what additional salary dollars on the local side is going to. So we have athletic coach EPR, homebound instructor pay, non-instructional extra time, instructional EPR and extra time, substitutes, year-long residence, and summer school. So from 2018, that was about $1.7 million, and in 2024, just over $4 million. We've gotten questions about overtime and what that looks like. I don't have the ability to drill down into the data in and of itself. It would be a manual process to go through, but those overtime availability of comp time or pay are part of our collective bargaining agreements. Any extra work is pre-approved through the supervisor and authorized through extra work forms, but any extra time can be for a variety of things. It could be a custodian working on a Saturday when we have a building use going on with a community group. It could be some of our secretaries working overtime at the beginning of the school year to get students and staff loaded into the systems. It could be teachers performing after-school programming or tutoring services. So it kind of runs the gamut. Slide 7, I was asked what travel costs look like. So these are all of the account codes that pull both staff and student travel from 2017 through so far this fiscal year. And that's split out for your information between state, local, and federal funds, and in-state versus out-of-state travel. So you can see back in 2017, it was about $150,000 in total, and then for the full fiscal year of 24, $287,000. So far this year, about $170,000. Slide 8 shows transportation costs. I will do a deeper analysis of all transportation costs, but for tonight's purposes, this is information from the October presentation as well. That was for private transportation and athletic transportation. So on the private transportation side, since 2017, we've had an increase of about 122%, or $864,000. And athletic, an increase of about 127,000 for 145%. Slide 9 shows the tax receipts from fiscal year 2017 through December 31st for 2025. So not a full year collections in there, although the vast majority of it. And this will show the jump from the 2017 collections to 2018 with that last referendum that was passed. It shows all tax rates, current expense, tuition, minor cap, and debt service. But the current expense there, while the rate has not changed since the last referendum, that changes based off of assessed property values each year. Slide 10 shows the revenue generation for 1 penny of tax collections. Back in 2017, it was $143,000. In 2018, $148,000. And today, about $186,000 per penny. Again, that is based off of assessed property values and the growth. One of the questions I received also was about the tax increase last time in March of 2017 versus this proposed tax increase. So in 2017, the local tax rate was $2.69. The referendum proposed an increase of 49 cents to $3.18, which was $95.41 to the average taxpayer, and that equated to about an 18% increase. In 2025, today, for the tax warrant that was set in July, the tax rate is $3.23. This proposed referendum would increase it $1.21 to $4.44. It is a $289.11 increase to the average taxpayer, which equates to 37%. Slide 12, one of the questions we received was about the staff that we hired during COVID with the ESSER funds that the district received from the feds. So the positions that we hired through ESSER were all temporary positions. Many of them were positions like full-time substitutes or itinerant teachers or additional custodians that were released. Some we did pick back up full-time through attrition. So if we had openings, like for example in our custodian ranks, that there were retirements or resignations, and one of those employees applied and was successful, they were hired on. And also in the increased additional units that we've earned over the past several years. We also paid a portion of substitute costs out of ESSER during that time. That was back when we had the COVID leave and the quarantines and a lot of absences. So obviously those have declined. However, there were still some sub-costs that would have to transition back to local funds. And then any other positions that were paid out of ESSER, as we all know, those funds ended last September. Anyone else that was picked up there was through unit growth or attrition. So none of those positions that existed during that time period are paid 100% out of local funds. Then slides 13 through 15 are based off of the FY25 preliminary budget. But I grouped them together. The yellow highlighted section is everything that is hitting salaries and collective bargaining agreements. The green highlighted our district operations, so what I called our central operations. So we still have to pay lease payments, we have to pay utilities, we have to pay legal bills, we have to pay charter choice payments, those kind of things. And then the peach color is the restricted use. So those are our vocational funds that are earned through our minutes and through our units. So they are for a specific purpose, and cutting them would not, and they are state funds, so cutting them would not change our local budget. The remaining line items there on pages 14 and 15 that are not highlighted total $5 million. So that gives you some perspective if we were to say an X% cut across the board on these discretionary budgets. For example, if we said 10%, that's only going to result in $500,000. While we'll take any savings we can get, it is not as significant as a need through the referendum. So before I move on from there, are there any questions? Okay, the second document attached in board docs shows the spreadsheet that I used to project out the referendum income, the expenses, and what our reserve balance for those discretionary funds will look like. This is the same format that you saw back in October when I did the projections and used FY22 through FY24 to project out what our revenues and expenses will look like for the next 5 fiscal years, this one included. You'll see the 2 highlighted lines there, local interest and Division 3. Those are items, local interest, obviously the interest rates fluctuate. There was a 2-year period of time during COVID where that was 0. So that is something that could fluctuate, but the projections are based on those most recent 3 years. And then our Division 3 equalization funds are the state funds that we get that tries to level up all the districts. And we know that right now the state is looking at fixing that formula and getting it back to what it's supposed to be with reassessment and every house and property in the state being assessed at the same time. So as a quote-unquote property-rich district, we don't know what that's going to look like in the future and if that's going to remain the same or go away. So with all of that being said, page 1, proposal number 1 is the $1.21.05 tax rate that we discussed about a week and a half ago, and putting the projected income from that in there with our additional expenses for salary negotiations, additional costs that we know we're going to have, and then some cost savings with some payroll recodes and riffing. That projects out the reserve balance to FY '29, which leaves us in that 10 to 11% range of building up that reserve to spend down until the next referendum. And just to note, for this fiscal year, from July 1st to September 30th, our summer payroll and operating expenses totaled $11.9 million. So that's something we have to keep in mind as we look at what that reserve balance looks like in the future. Page 2, I was asked to try some different scenarios. So page 2 is proposal number 2 to make it an even dollar increase. That drops the projected income to about $18.6 million. And then drops, obviously, the ending carryover balances as well. So there, it's remaining in the 4 to 6% range, as high as $15.1 million, and as low as $9.2 million. Page 3, or proposal number 3, looks at it if it was 90 cents. So that drops the referendum income to $16.7 million. Further drops that ending carryover reserve balance to the 3 to 5% range, but you can see projects that in FY '29, that ending balance is $1.8 million, which is significantly low and critically low. And then the last page, page 4, projects it at 80 cents, so that's $14.8 million in revenue. Further drops that reserve balance down to as low as $3.2 million in FY '28, but then becomes negative in FY '29. So again, critically low. Any questions?
Mrs. Smith, is it safe to say that we cannot cut ourselves out of this?
Yes, it's pretty much impossible to cut yourself out of a referendum. The kind of cuts that would need to be done to generate these kinds of revenues is significant and would hamper our operations.
But should the referendum pass, we still should be looking.
We
at
should always be
what
looking
we
for
have
cost
and
efficiencies
try to
and
streamline it.
effectiveness. Remember, I was a former auditor, so that was something
remember.
that we always, I'm reminded frequently. But that is something that we would look at as part of audits, like, are these efficient, and operations, are you getting the most bang for your buck? So I think that is something that we do, and we need to continue to do regularly every year.
So we have to look at a package that would work at the same time, utilizing cuts in the discretionary budgets
Correct.
and try to make something that's going to fit. Now, this last referendum, 2017, that's been how many years?
That will be 8 years in March.
That's a very long current expense period.
Correct.
between
Typically 5 to 7 years, but some districts will hit 3, 5. You know, it depends on the needs and the appetite for the taxpayer. But yes, we have pushed this out as far as we possibly can.
And even, I think I'm right, with this 3 million, with the RIFs in there, so whether we do a referendum or not, whether it passes or fails, we're still going to have reductions in force, right?
Correct. Especially at looking at efficiencies of operations.
And then those get backfilled based on seniority, and I know that's an HR thing, but, right, Celeste, if it's a $3 million reduction in force, whether the referendum passes or not, it goes seniority-wise?
In the end, yes, there is a domino effect. If there's someone with a significant amount of seniority who is ripped from their particular position, then they have the ability through the contract to then either bump into a non-tenured position or bump into an opening if there are no non-tenured positions, or then other tenured employees. So there are different levels of dominoes that result from that.
So that would probably encompass all aspects of the district as far as the positions of the or people in the district?
Yes, on some level. Some groups would be more than others. Yes.
I would think it would be our goal to make sure that our kids have quality teachers and the support staff to help them in those classrooms, and try to minimize as much of those cuts as we possibly could.
Yes, that would be the goal.
Any other questions? Thanks, Celeste.
So, Ms. Smith, this is obviously a pay now or pay later scenario for our district with this referendum. That's fair assessment, correct?
Yes.
So in option one, it gives us the ability to unfortunately burden the taxpayers a little more on the front half, but for hopes that this lasts 7, 8 years as
Correct.
opposed to 2 or 3 and going back in 2 or 3, 4 years for another referendum. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, correct. Any time we lower this rate, it's going to push up the need to go to referendum again in the future.
Ms. Smith, I have one more question.
Sure.
And then I'll stop I think I will anyway. The current assessment, Sussex County reassessment, I should say.
Yes,
There's a lot of questions about, how that's going to affect tax bills.
correct.
But there is a limit, because I know it's supposed to stay in terms of the school tax revenue neutral.
Correct.
However, I do believe the boards have the ability to increase that one time 10% of the local revenue during the reassessment year.
Yes.
That alone would only increase our available monies about $4 $4.5 million.
Correct.
So that's not going to help either.
Reassessment is up in the air. The county is still getting the final numbers. I believe it's mid to late February, but I don't have it off the top of my head, of when the county will release that, will have that information and approve it and release it. However, we know that during this time, there's still the informal appeals, then there's a formal appeal process. So the assessment numbers that we'll receive as a district are going to be in flux for a while. A new bill was introduced, I think, late last week to exempt all agricultural property from property assessments, where in the past there were certain pieces of it. So however that tracks will affect that number, which affects the calculations of the tax rate. So there's a lot of things going on with that. However, at the end of the day, in a year of reassessment by law, the board does have the ability to collect up to 10% more than the current revenues that were received in the prior fiscal year. So it's not required to the district and to the counties. The reassessment is intended to be revenue neutral. That 10% is in there to allow for any changes with delinquencies and growth and that kind of thing. So a district like ours that's been growing 2-3% every year, if we remain revenue neutral in the year following a reassessment, we've missed out on that growth. So the board does have that ability, but yes, you are correct. Once we have the final tax collection amounts in June, and that 10% is only on the current expense side, right now it's 4.5 million, but that's not enough to push aside the referendum.
It would affect the board the same way as the match tax, basically, in the fact that we would have to vote as a board to pass that. However, there is no 70, 60, or 70% coming from the state to help us. That would just be a flat local
Correct.
on that. Okay.
And that would simply be a Band-Aid.
Short term.
Smith, I have
Correct.
a question. Because of the impact of this amount on the families of Indian River School District,
Yes.
but also the importance of passing this referendum for the running of Indian River School District, looking at all of that universally, the time period that we have at this late date, with approximately 4 days left in January and then the month of February, and 20 days in March, to go out into the public and to really help them understand the importance of this referendum and why it is the amount it is. Do you feel that it is a feasible amount of time to accomplish that goal?
Based on the conversations that I've had with at least one other district who had a significant increase, not as much as this, but it was significant, compared to what we've historically seen, we have enough time today to get that message out by March 20th.
Is there a team or a committee that will be the responsible people to explain that to the public?
After our last board meeting on Thursday, we brought that team together immediately. On Tuesday, that following Tuesday, the cabinet team, as well as Mr. Mall and Mr. Wheatley was part of that discussion as well. They already have the information packaged. We're fine-tuning it. Mr. Wheatley sent some really good information on Friday related to the voter base and where it's important to get out and how votes have occurred in the past. But really, the main thing is packaging the slides together, the presentation together that's informative, understandable to our community. So we'll be ready to go as soon as the board is comfortable with us going out this week. I mean, we're ready to go. We've got, Mr. Mall has developed a comprehensive list of where we went in 2017, fire halls and communities, and we go into our schools. So HOAs, whoever will allow us to come in and present, Rotaries, et cetera. So there's a comprehensive list of where we were, but we also have a listing of the most up-to-date HOAs. Mr. Mall sends our newsletter out now much more widely than it has been previously sent. So that's generated some good information out to our community. So we're ready to go. So that team will go out and present. We will go to our schools and present. We will present at PTOs. So this is just about every day from now until the 20th of getting that information out collectively. And I know Mr. Steele is here. He's done the referendums before. I've done them before. So it's certainly a collected effort. My plan is to share each of those meetings with the board members. Any board member that wants to accompany me or a member of the team, whether it's out to the community or into the school, we certainly welcome that. In addition, we will do some virtual sessions, whether it's Facebook Live, whether it's just a YouTube Live we can do. We will process those as well, so folks that can't come in have the opportunity to interact as well.
So to be clear, I want to make sure I'm clear on it. If when the referendum passes, that 10% then is a moot point, right? We're not going to go to referendum, get the 121, and then turn around and say, we're going to increase it another 10%.
I don't think that we will need to do that, but that will be up to a board vote. And keep in mind, too, you can go anywhere between 0 and 10%. You could do the 3% normal growth, you could do 0, you can do arbitrarily 7. It's up to the board. It doesn't have to be 0 or 10.
But as a whole, the 10 would not be sufficient without
Correct.
the referendum. But
Correct.
we don't have to do it if we pass the referendum.
I believe we can make everything work. These projections did not take that into account, the 10%.
Because I think we're being unfair to the public, and this is just me personally, I think we're being unfair to the public if we go out for $1.21 for a referendum, and that passes, and then we turn around and say, oh, additionally, we can do from 0 up to 10%. It's like you're double dipping,
True. It is.
and I don't want to see us double dip.
I agree. I think as a board, we steadfast and say, no, we're not going to raise that 10% at all if we move forward. But, we've got a lot to consider. we do have a lot to consider.
So we have this on the agenda as a potential action item, given I wanted to make sure we were transparent with your questions. So thank you, Mrs. Smith. That's additional information you have to consider. We have quite a bit more on our agenda, and I know we do need to recess for personnel review back to exec session. So you can certainly come back to that later on in open session when we come back out if you so choose. Right now, it's, we would move forward as we agreed to and voted on Thursday, unless there's an amendment tonight or in the future.
Ms. Wright, I'd like to make a motion, we table this. I asked some personnel questions I think probably would be better addressed in exec session pertaining to this and the possible cuts.
Okay. We have a motion to table. Do I have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor of tabling the discussion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That is unanimous. So that would be likewise for 6.10, right?
Yes, we don't, and we don't necessarily need to table. There's just no action taken for 610 because I want to verify if there's any changes to 609, that would necessitate potential changes to 610. So I would wait on that as well. And again, if no action is taken on 609 for any amendments, we do need to visit 610 because we need to take action on moving forward with that document regardless.
Correct. What's in board docs is a shell of what needs to go to the Department of Elections for the notice of special election. And what has happened with referendums in the past is we send that to elections, they send it to their legal counsel. I think a lot of times there's changes that come back, so the board needs to see it multiple times. If you so choose to look at it tonight, whether it's now or later, it's a shell in there of, without the dates and the dollars, but of what we're looking for in the referendum, the words. So we do need, at some point, to get that moving along to elections. But we can fill in the rest of it at a later time and bring it back. It's just the legal review that can sometimes take a while.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we move on to old business. That's 7.01, major capital planning.
Yes, as discussed recently during our construction meeting and some of this discussed during buildings and grounds, for New Sussex Central High School, grading and concrete work at the main entrance is underway. Exterior metal panel installation continues in the classroom wing and now on the third floor. Interior glazing is underway in the media center and the collaborative areas. Rough-in of the classroom wing mechanical, electrical, and ductwork is substantially complete at this time. Painting continues in the gymnasium and the classroom wing. Flooring is being installed in Area E hallways, and the wood doors are due to arrive before the end of January. That concludes the report.
Thank you. 7.02, Howard T. Ennis.
Yes, thank you. The contractors have submitted their final change order and final payment requests. We should receive the remainder of that project closeout paperwork from the architects prior to this board meeting, which I believe we took care of earlier. Thank you.
7.03, GW Carver consent update. Dr. Winsett.
Good evening.
Evening.
We have the end of the quarter happening this week, so we are going to be collecting the information to submit that for our quarter 2 updates. And then there will be a continuation of our Community Advisory Board. Our next meeting's on March 6th at 4 o'clock, and we continue to monitor the district plans for disproportionality, both our graduation rate and our discipline. Any questions?
Thank you. Committee reports, 8.01, buildings and grounds. Mr. Steele.
Thank you, Ms. Wright. We met on Monday, January the 13th, and discussed a wide variety of topics. Some of the things that already have been discussed this evening: Howard T. Ennis completing the final change orders. We talked about the new construction. We heard about the review of the change orders, as well as a lively discussion on the earlier vote that we had on the turf for the academic courtyard. I think the sticking point on that happened to be the cost of the Trex decking, so was at least happy to see that we dropped that, and the school will be picking that up as we go through. Also, the old business that was discussed, Buildings and Ground Support Center. In the last 30 days, 18 tickets were open, 35 tickets closed, and 28 tickets are currently active. Dr. Owens did inform us that the January 7th Futures Committee was canceled due to snow. Current topics discussion will include feeder school boundaries, enrollment, new housing, growth, balance, and demographics, and I believe he's had one since that point.
We have, yes.
That you'll report at the next Building and Grounds in February. The Artesian Water final assets transfer, the final contract document with Artesian Water. A warranty bill of sale will be executed by the end of January to wrap up the formal legal documents. And Artesian Well took over the operations of Howard T. Ennis and Sussex Central Water Systems beginning of November. New business, the annual facility assessments program. Last year was the first year of the state's new facility program. We have to submit facility assessments for each school to the state by May 1st. Mr. Dooley did let us know that that will coincide with our regular inspections that we do at all of our schools, and they will be reporting back to the board at that particular time in May. Again, the final discussion, as I said before, was on the academic courtyard surface that we discussed this evening. Our next meeting will be February the 10th at 5 o'clock p.m.
Thank you, Mr. Steve. 8.02, comprehensive school safety, Mr. Castle.
Thank you, Mrs. Wright. No reports for this month.
Thank you. 8.03, finance, Mr. Peden.
Yes. Mrs. Smith reviewed the December 31st, 24 financial position report. This report projects the state and local discretionary fund balances at June 30th, 2025, based on actual December 31st, 2024 balances with projected revenues and expenses for the period January 1st through June 30th. The revenue projections are based on the collections for the same time period last year. Depending on the funding source, the expense projections are based on either the expenses for the same time period last year or for the first half of the current fiscal year. The discretionary balances at June 30th, 2025 are projected to be $12.6 million. Mrs. Smith also reviewed the December 31st, 2024 financial reports. That concludes my report.
Thank you. 8.04, curriculum, Mr. Neal.
Thank you, Mrs. Wright. The curriculum committee met on Monday, the January 13th, and there were several items on the agenda, one of which we've already discussed tonight, the recognition of National School Counseling Week, the week of February 3rd through the 7th. We did have a presentation by representatives of our counseling departments from all three levels, elementary, middle, and high schools. A very informative presentation about the kinds of work that they're doing now with all of our students, and it was very good to hear the kinds of work that is happening now, giving them good information about our students that's really helping schools, I believe, and helping the students. There was a very robust conversation about middle school honors criteria. And after the discussion that happened on that day, Dr. Jones took note of the information that was shared and took that to a secondary principals meeting that followed that meeting. And then we're going to bring that back to the next curriculum committee meeting. So we'll keep you posted on that follow-up discussion. There was also a presentation about an elementary Spanish immersion ELA pilot. The elementary Spanish immersion program will pilot Amplify Caminos, which is a K-5 Spanish immersion language arts curriculum. This curriculum promotes biliteracy by helping students to become confident readers, writers, and thinkers in Spanish. It also builds rich content knowledge. The timeline was shared, and some decisions will be made about next steps with this particular curriculum. So we'll keep you posted on that. The next meeting will be held on February 10th, and that concludes my report.
Thank you. 8.05, DSBA Board of Directors, Mrs. Pryor.
At the January 15th meeting, they reported that there's a comprehensive review of Public Education Funding Committee looking for ways to improve the existing system. And Mr. Toll will be meeting with the new governor and the new Secretary of Education, and will report back. Our next meeting is March 5th.
Thank you. 8.06, DSBA Legislative, Mrs. Briggs.
At this time, I don't have a report. We meet next week on Wednesday, February 5th, so hopefully next board meeting I'll have something for you.
Thank you. 8.07, Special Education Task Force, Mr. Neal.
The Special Education Committee met last Friday, as a matter of fact, and our discussion centered on where we are with several areas. So, one, we have to do an annual determination. Indian River is required to submit an annual report that details our collective actions towards meeting the Department of Education targets, and a progress report is being submitted soon, February 1st. We had a requirement to look at our disproportionate representation. That was one of the areas of concern. We've created a handbook for use with staff, and a corrective action plan, which is due on March 14th, so that's something that's ongoing. We are working on a comprehensive audit. This is an annual audit of special education paperwork. They pull a certain number of special education files and take a look at them to see how we're doing with our paperwork. That was submitted in December of 2024, so we're awaiting how we did on that. A fiscal audit, another part, the fourth part. Fiscal audit is required to ensure that resources we qualify for are being allocated properly. And this is being closed out, so we're looking good there. And then the other area is alternate assessment. There was concern about the number of special ed students taking DESA Alt. If a district has more than 1% of its students taking that test, it raises a red flag. Our staff surely recognize that we have students from outside the district who are part of our numbers. So when those students were removed, we were well within the state regs. So that was good news there. So one good news that was shared during the meeting on Friday was that as a result of the review of our LEA's data, the department has determined our LEA is 100% compliant with federal indicator 13 requirements. That was one of the areas that we were being looked at. So that's good news for our district. So some final thoughts, ongoing targets that we're looking at. District will utilize available funds to bring for staff so who can provide services for our students in person. That was one of the areas of concern. Targeted behavior supports in our schools are being allocated for the 25-26 school year. We're working on some podcasts that will highlight some of the things that we're doing with our IEP programs and behavior supports. We recognized early this year Behavioral Health Professional of the Year. I'm sorry, that's underway. I apologize. That recognition will be happening in the future. And Dr. Wisted is continuing to facilitate school site visits to monitor the support services that we're providing. I think just sitting, listening to the professionals around the table, we're in a real good position as a district moving forward. So our next meeting will be held on March the 14th, 2025. That concludes my report.
Thank you. 8.08, policy, Mrs. Taylor.
Thank you, Mrs. Wright. The Policy Committee met on January 13th at 4 p.m. There were 4 policies that were under review for second readings. ECA, Security Camera System Policy with no additional changes. GCBD, Professional Leave and Absences. We're going to delete the last sentence of added language, and we will then proceed with the second reading. GDA, Support Staff Positions, no additional changes. Proceed on to the second reading. And GDN, Evaluation of Support Staff, no additional changes, and proceed on with second reading. So, Mrs. Wright, we will need board action on those 4 policies tonight. Moving on to our policies that were under review, BBF, School Board Member Ethics, we are reviewing that only. EE, Transportation Services Management, there were some additional changes needed regarding the responsibility of cost if equipment is not removed. Return for review at our next policy meeting. We'll continue on with that. I'm going to skip that next one and I'll come back to that in just a minute. IKEA, Recovery of Original Credit Opportunities. Changes were reviewed and we will proceed with our first reading. And JHFB, Constable's Use of Deadly Force. The changes were reviewed and we will proceed with the first reading. I would like to return to IGDJ, Band and Interscholastic Athletic Uniforms. A request for the Indian River High School girls basketball wear for the military uniforms on February 18th, 2025 is attached to my policy committee meeting minutes. Also, dates were proposed for the 25-26 school year, depending on time and approval. Consideration of language associated with board approval for uniform deviations, and consideration of a sunset clause for existing uniforms were also discussed. And considerations will be discussed by the board tonight according to discussion at the meeting. So at this time, our current policy on band and interscholastic athletic uniforms and logos basically is standing as written unless the board chooses to change any of this verbiage that we perhaps discussed tonight. At this time, Indian River High School and its feeder schools will be in green, gold, and white. Sussex Central High School and its feeder schools will be in blue, gold, and white. And gray may be used as an accent color unless there are any deviations. They must be presented to the board previous to adoption, and then the board may make approval before purchase. There was discussion about existing uniforms that have already been purchased and approved in the past. There was also discussion about a perhaps sunset clause for those uniforms hereafter. We also discussed hats and the color of hats that are sometimes being brought for approval, and making sure that the United States flag is on all uniforms. Dr. Owens, do you want to add to that discussion?
I think he captured it well. I mean, we've had this policy for some time, and from time to time we have schools that present uniforms that are really the most popular one is a black uniform that's come before us, and it has to be considered at that time. One thing that we have done here recently that I like is determining what dates on which that uniform will be worn. So we all are aware it's on a, whatever that special occasion may be. So that is something, it's not necessarily in policy, but I would suggest we continue to do that. But as it sits right now, if a principal gets a request from a coach for an alternate uniform, whatever color, gray, black, whatever that is, it needs to come before the committee for consideration. And right now, we previously reviewed the current black uniforms. I think it was both basketball teams and a baseball uniform at Sussex Central that are still in good condition. And we asked that those dates be brought before the committee for consideration. I think we did that last month, and those were approved. So again, there's been discussion at the committee level of whether we should eliminate that sentence altogether or continue to consider. So we thought it important just to bring up to the entire group to see if there's any discussion.
Any other thoughts or comments?
I know the military uniforms donated by the Delaware Guard are always black and gold because that's the Army's colors. So we did permit the Indian River team to wear those this year, and I think we should continue, based on board approval, allow that to be an option, particularly in the event that we get a sponsored game, and when the Guard sponsors a game, both teams playing at the school that day would wear the respective colors, so black and gold and black and gold, and then green, gold and black. So you would have to allow that option to ever get a sponsored Delaware Guard game wholly.
That's a good point. All right.
And I do
Go ahead, Terry.
support the military 100%, but does that open us up to other organizations that want to sponsor uniforms, that we would have to do that as well?
I think they would have to get approval from the board. It would have to be presented in a certain, I think,
On a
period of time.
case-by-case basis right now.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so we adjourned at 4:42, and our next meeting is scheduled for February 10th at 2025 at 4 p.m.
And
So we needed,
Mrs. Wright and Mrs. Taylor,
Yes.
we do not have an attachment that I could see
Oh.
for the military uniform that we did discuss.
Right.
Okay, I didn't see it in board docs.
No.
I know Mrs. Wright has it. We did review that at our committee meeting, and I know Mr. Williams is here. That, again, is a donated uniform, and Mr. Williams, correct me if I'm wrong, a donated uniform for girls' basketball. It does actually meet the color requirements because it's green and gold. It's just a green and gold camo. So, but it is a bit of a deviation, and I think it's good recognition for the National Guard that's worked with us to provide that uniform. Anything I'm missing there, Mr. Williams?
No, that came from one of our assistant coaches for the girls' basketball team, who's also currently in the U.S. Army, and one of our recruiters that works with our school. It is green and gold, it does meet the guidelines. It is just a camo blend of the green and gold.
I just want to make sure we acknowledge that so it can be considered for approval this evening as well.
And you needed that for February 18th, is that correct?
Yeah, we're going to try to, as soon as we get it approved, as we know with the football uniforms, it takes a little time to get those made. If for some reason it is not done in time, if it is approved, we would reschedule that for a military night next year, but we would have that uniform on hand, much like we have with football.
okay, so we need to take action on your second readings, correct?
Right. And this.
Yeah, I think we can vote separately. Yes.
Okay, so I'd entertain a motion to accept the second readings that Mrs. Taylor presented.
So moved.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That is unanimous. And now we'll move on to the uniforms. So that's the basketball.
Correct.
Right? So is there any discussion, comments on the basketball uniform for Indian River being their colors but in camo? And for a specific date only?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to accept that uniform. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That is unanimous. Okay. 8.09, IREA representative.
Good evening, Blair Catlin Brown, school social worker at SDSA and IREA Vice President for Teachers. I was scrolling around on the social media and I saw that this is School Board Appreciation Month. Didn't know, I Googled it, it really is. So this, I've said it many times, but this is truly a thankless job. You cannot make everyone happy, and people are mad at you most of the time. I wrote down, it takes one heck of a strong and dedicated human to step up for this role. So to each of you on this stage, whether we agree all the time or don't, we appreciate you stepping up for your community, and we know that it's hard, and we appreciate it. So thank you very much, and you are appreciated. Excited to report that on Friday at Sussex Central High School is the second annual Para PD Day. Cassie Queen has been, our VP for Paras, has been working diligent on it. She wanted me to pass along her deep appreciation for Alexis McLeish for really making sure this comes together on time, and we really look forward to it being an amazing event. And we think we're leading the way in our area. We heard some other districts are doing some Para PD days, so we think they might have gotten the idea from us, so we love that. The referendum, whichever conclusion that comes to with your plans moving forward, just want to keep you updated that we sent a survey to our members today asking for their feedback on how they're going in terms of feeling with votes on the referendum, but also asking them to provide us with what concerns they have and concerns they may be hearing in the community. I'm going to put that together, and we're going to give it to you guys, the district, on Monday, just to give some ideas that I know that Dave was packaging together so you guys can fully address questions and concerns that are on the ground. And so we make sure that you're ready to roll out when we start the community meetings and staff meetings about that. And I already have like 125 responses, so be busy this weekend reading through those. I'll make them easy to digest for y'all. Very glad that we fully finalized the teacher, para, and secretary contracts again, and we will start negotiations soon on the custodian contracts. As I previously stated, we love the collaborative effort that we had on those. We look forward to continuing that collaboration by moving forward with the full intent of all of the language changes and making sure that we can be successful under those contracts. Lastly, possibly a little less upbeat of a thing to discuss, but I think it's important to share. We are hearing from staff and students that there's a looming feeling of fear and pain felt by our immigrant community and by our staff who work with our students and families who are immigrants. While we've heard that the district is holding stand-up meetings with the staff and it is occurring in buildings, this problem is so big and it is so painful for our staff and students that we feel that there may be a need to provide a public-facing comment or a board resolution to provide clarity to our staff, students, and the community. When I emailed our members, I'm gonna try not to choke up. When I emailed our members asking how everyone was doing on this issue, one of the emails made me straight up weep. It was very hard to read about students and staff in our buildings with the highest immigrant population crying and not knowing what to do. They feel lost and scared. They are trying to be brave for one another. Reports of kids trying to be strong for the teachers because they want to support each other, and still trying to move forward with a strong academic environment. Everybody knows that's the mission of the day, but it is still very hard for them to move forward. Staff, students, and families need to hear a clear message, providing them with guidance, support, and resources. They need it now. We cannot celebrate our multicultural nights, Latino literacy classes, and We Are IRSD events unless we're also willing to be equally vocal in supporting those same community members in their time of need. Thank you.
Right now, I am. Yep. It's in there, but I'm back. Yep.
Superintendent's report, 9.01, monthly activities.
Thank you, Mrs. Wright. This is very timely. I did not talk to Blair beforehand, but I have some notes here from my full report is in board docs, but I did have some notes I wanted to share. We did meet with our administrators last week. We obviously have received reports and concerns from staff and parents associated with immigration enforcement within our schools. To date, we have not experienced any visits to our schools from enforcement agencies, so I just wanted to make you aware of that first. However, the concern is there nonetheless. Last week, we did meet with our school leaders to review our district policies with regard to agency visits to schools, including police and non-police agencies. We also reviewed our Family Education Rights, our FERPA Privacy Act documents, and discussed those with our principals. It's a good task to review those anyway. Those are important documents, and we asked the principals to share those with their front office staff, as well as their SROs and constables, and any staff, including their full staff, that has concerns. So we want to make sure that our staff know that we have policies that are helping to drive our reaction when and if someone shows up at our doors for information or access to our students. In addition, our counselors will be prepared to support students who may be experiencing anxiety and uncertainty. And I think we know that our counselors also work with our staff. So if our staff are experiencing situations of anxiety or concern, they're available to work with them as well. Principals have been asked to brief their front office staff, as I said, and their constables when and if this situation may arise. And just last week, late last week, superintendents received word that DOE is looking to release additional information and possible resources. I know some of our neighboring states, New Jersey, Maryland, I've seen some guidance. So DOE is looking at that. So anxiously awaiting resources that they may provide as well. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Thank you, Dr. Owens. And now we'll move on to 9.02, the district calendar changes.
Thank you. A couple changes this evening. North Georgetown Elementary Winter Concert from January 21st to January 30th, 2025. Cancel the Lord Baltimore PTO meeting on February 19th, 2025. And those do require action.
Any questions, concerns, comments? I would entertain a motion to accept these changes.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That is unanimous. Financial reports. 10.01, financial summaries for month ending December 31st, 2024. Mrs. Smith?
Yes, the reports and board docs are as of December 31st. We were 50% of the way through the fiscal year already. The reports have been updated with the final budgets that were approved by the board in our December board meeting. So with that, we've received 87% of our total budgeted revenue, 92% of our budgeted discretionary revenue, and 98% of our budgeted local tax revenue. We did not receive the December interest information until January, so that line item is zero, but we'll have both months updated for next month. We have spent 42% of total budgeted expenses, 53% of total discretionary expenses, and 34% of our budgeted tuition-funded classroom expenses. And Howard T.Ennis has spent 50% of their budgeted expenses.
Any questions, concerns, comments? I'd entertain a motion to accept the summary report.
So moved.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That is unanimous. 10.02, detailed information for month ending December 31st, 2024.
Our student activity funding balance is approximately $192,000. We have $9.9 million in federal funds available and are holding approximately $1.4 million in donations and internal accounts.
Any questions, concerns, comments? I'd entertain a motion to accept this report.
So moved.
We have
Second.
a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That is unanimous. 10.03, major capital improvements for month ending December 31st, 2024.
In December, we paid out $4.1 million in major cap expenses.
Any questions? I'd entertain a motion to accept the report.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That is unanimous. 10.04, minor capital improvements for month ending December 31st, 2024.
For the allocations that we have open and available, we have spent and encumbered $4.9 million and have approximately $1.6 million remaining.
Any questions? I'd entertain a motion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That is unanimous. 10.05, financial position report.
This is the report that we do 3 times a year for the state that projects out our income and expenses. So for this one through December 31st, we're projecting to March 31st and then to June 30th. So to prepare this report, I use the actual balances as of December 31st. And then based on the line item, it's our discretionary local and state funding lines. So based off of those line items, depending on what they are, is what I use to project out revenue and expenses. Revenue is typically looked at with what we received this time last year. Leading into, as we go into these months, we get less and less tax revenues. So I use that as an indicator of what we'll receive this year. Expenses are either based off of the same quarters of last year or the second quarter of this fiscal year, depending on what the line item is and when the spending typically happens for that appropriation. So with that, our payroll 1 month of local is about $3.6 million now. And between the local funds, we're projected to have just over $12 million on June 30th with $484,000 in State Division 2 funds. So again, indicative of our need for referendum, that balance is going down. And we need those funds to get through the summer. So we're gonna make it, but it's gonna be tight with cash flow.
Any questions? I'd entertain a motion to accept this report.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That is unanimous.
Thank you.
Mrs. Smith.
Thank you.
Communications, 11.01, field trip requests.
Thank you. We have an overnight trip by Indian River High School's FFA, March 25th and 26th to Newark, Delaware. An overnight trip by Selbyville Middle School VEX Robotics Team, May 8th through 12th, 2025 to Dallas, Texas. Overnight trip by Selbyville Middle School's TSA Team, June 27th to July 1 to Nashville, Tennessee.
Any questions? I'd entertain a motion to accept these requests.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That is unanimous. So now we recess and go back in.
Yes, I would say we recess, not consider 12 and 13 until after the meeting, correct? We need a motion for that.
We need a motion now to recess and go back into executive session for items 12 and 13.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We're now in executive session. into our regular session. We will follow our agenda that's on personnel, which is 12. So we'll do 12.1, the personnel agenda for January the 27th, 2025. I would entertain a motion at this time to accept the agenda.
So moved.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That is unanimous. 12.02, personnel addendum for January 27th, 2025. Any questions? I would entertain a motion to accept.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That is unanimous. 12.03, contractual agenda for January 27th, 2025. Any questions? I would entertain a motion to accept.
So moved. Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That is unanimous. 12.04 is listed just for your informational purposes for the notification of retirements. We'll move on to student hearings. 13.01.
I make a motion that we accept the hearing officer's report.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That is unanimous. 13.02, student number 2556.
I make a motion we accept the hearing officer's report.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
No.
Mrs. Troublefield, will you poll the board, please?
Mrs. Briggs?
Yes.
Mr. Cathell?
Yes.
Mrs. Klein?
Yes.
Mr. Neal?
Yes.
Mr. Peden?
No.
Mrs. Pryor?
Yes.
Mr. Steele?
Yes.
Mrs. Taylor?
No.
Mrs. West Warner?
Yes.
Mrs. Wright?
No.
Okay, that's 7 yes, 3 no, and 0 abstentions.
The motion passes by majority. 13.03, student number 2557.
I make a motion we accept the hearing officer's report.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Mrs. Troublefield, will you poll the board, please?
Mrs. Briggs?
Yes.
Mr. Cathell?
Yes.
Mrs. Klein?
Yes.
Mr. Neal?
Yes.
Mr. Peden?
No.
Mrs. Pryor?
Yes.
Mr. Steele?
Yes.
Mrs. Taylor?
No.
Mrs. West Warner?
Yes.
Mrs. Wright?
No.
That is 7 yes, 3 no, and 0 abstentions.
That motion passes by majority. Now we will go back to 6.09. I would entertain a motion at this time for the recommendation for the referendum.
Do we have to make an action if it's already in place?
If we don't do it, it stays the way it was when we voted on
Correct.
Thursday.
Yes, it would be a motion to amend what was taken care of on Thursday night. Otherwise, we keep the referendum in place as voted.
Do I hear a motion to amend?
I make a motion to amend and direct the.
To amend it?
administration- Yes.
Okay. We have a motion to amend the voting that took place on Thursday evening. Is there a second?
Well, the motion to amend to, how would we want it amended? Not a motion to amend the vote. That vote's already occurred.
Right.
It's a motion to amend to something new. So that would be the motion.
Yeah, the discussion that we had about
hear you in that one.
The discussion we had about directing the team to find, indicate cuts for the schools to, right? Is that what we're talking about?
I think that's independent of the referendum discussion, so.
Okay.
And I don't know if that would take a vote, but we can certainly take a vote if there's something outside of the referendum discussion.
Okay, I'm sorry, maybe I need to remove my motion. I thought that's what we were talking about doing. So I removed that. I removed my motion.
So do I hear a motion to amend 6.09? Hearing none, it will stand as it was on Thursday evening. 6.10, the notice of special election, which is the time frame, the dollar amount, and the locations at some point in time.
So the motion would be to allow for the district to move forward with the notice of special election for the board. The motion would be to move forward with the notice of special election for the referendum as needed, so we can alert the Department of Elections and handle it legally. Tammy, I don't know if we need to add anything else for consideration for a motion, at least.
The notice is legal language. There are 5 bullets in there, I believe it's 5, that are district-specific for this referendum. The rest of it is just what we have to say legally for dates and amounts and absentee ballots and all of that stuff. So the bullets are what we crafted ourselves.
It's the ability for us to move forward with that.
Correct.
I make a motion that we follow the notice of special election as stated.
So moved.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That is unanimous.
Thank you.
Now we come to public comments. 14:01, the second time in the evening. Is there anyone that would like to make a public comment?
I'd like to make a motion before we go to public comments that the administration moves forward with making a strategic plan and making necessary cuts of staffing and operating expenses as they feel needed.
Second.
I agree with that, but are we allowed to
I don't
vote if
think you
it's
can
not
do
on the
it.
agenda?
Yeah, it is not on the agenda for action, so you can direct us. I don't believe we can
Okay.
take a vote on it.
All right, I'm sorry. I'd like to direct the board, I would hope the board would stand together as a team in directing the administration to move forward and making the necessary cuts for staffing and operating expenses as they feel needed.
Understood, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so no public comments at this time. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
This meeting is adjourned.
I had to get
I
one.
would like to make a motion to get a better chair for the next meeting.
Hey, I got it.